So yeah, I'm going to talk about learning without human annotations, or what we can call self-supervised learning of visual representations, which is basically the topic of my PhD. So yeah, I'm soon going to graduate, so I'm at the end of my PhD with the topic of large-scale and supervised learning of visual representation. So my advisor are Piotr Bujanowski and Armand Julin at FAIR, and Julien Méral at INRIA. And before that, I graduated from École Polytechnique in France and from KTH in Sweden. So annotating datasets is a cumbersome and expensive process. So it's also like a biased process. So it's biased towards the task that you want to solve. And it's also biased towards the annotator own biases. So as a result, it's a possibly unreliable and noisy process. And sometimes it's not even possible to annotate the data. So these are images from my Facebook account. And you see that like intuitively, it should be possible for an AI agent to find like similarities between the images and to find like some common pattern and to like reason about the images without being given these labels. And also you see that these labels, they are like pretty arbitrary, and you could like completely change them and then they would be correct as well. So why not just let the AI system just learn from the images themselves? So that's the question we try to answer. I mean, I've been trying to tackle during my PhDs, like can we train AI systems without annotations? So more precisely, what we want to do is to learn representation from unlabeled data, and it's what we call self-supervised pre-training. So you have this amount of unlabeled data that you want to feed to a neural network system, and then you would like that the neural network system can reuse this knowledge, and that the representations that it has learned should be useful for solving like a bunch of downstream tasks. So let's review what happens when we do have the labels. Like it's what we call supervised pre-training, and it basically takes the form of labels classification. So here, so we have a data set of images plus their labels, and we train the neural network to classify the images into their labels. So here the label for that image should be maintained, and then you train the network to classify this. And then if you train the network for this task on a large data set, so typically ImageNet, then the network would have acquired good representation that would be useful for downstream tasks. And so in self-supervised learning, we want to replace this supervised pre-training by pre-training on images only. So to do so, we try to design a learning task that does not rely on human annotations. So I think a good example of it is like colorization, which was proposed in 2016. And here the network is trained to actually colorize the images. And you see that to train this task, you do not need to have annotators, because like the target, so the RGB information is already present in the data set. And then you hope that if the network is good at colorization, then it would have acquired a good understanding of the objects and scene present in the images. Also, like I didn't say it, but feel free to interrupt me at any time if something is unclear. So yeah, designing self-supervised tasks is a very active research area with many work which has been proposed in the past few years. I think this is a good reference for like a almost exhaustive list of this work. But yeah, so when I started my PhD, like all of this was unknown at the time. And so I started at this point. And at this point, like self-supervised learning was not working super well. And we were like much below the performance of supervised pre-training. And so the motivation when I arrived in this field was like, can we try to mimic what happens with supervised pre-training? And so can we try to mimic this label classification task, but we do not have labels. So could we find a way to find like pseudo labels that would allow us to learn good representation? So that's the first question that I've been trying to answer, is like, can we use clustering for self-supervised learning? And this led to the publication of Deep Cluster in ECCV in 2018. So yeah, here the motivation is to use the cluster assignments as pseudo labels. So we have the training images without labels. And we take the representation for the entire dataset given by the neural network, and then we perform clustering on these representations. And this, the cluster assignments will give pseudo labels to train the network with a classification loss, just like before. So clustering is performed on the full dataset, as I said, and it's performed before each epoch. So you alternate between like a clustering step and then training the network during one epoch on these pseudo labels. And the clustering algorithm we use is k-means, and k, the number of clusters, is like a hyperparameter of the method. And so in practice, we use like an order of magnitude more clusters than the real number of classes in the dataset. And also, like, data augmentation is absolutely crucial for the method to work. And it actually does not learn anything useful if you don't do random cropping. So yeah, now we have this deep cluster method to perform self-supervised learning, and we want to evaluate the features that we get this way. So how to evaluate self-supervised learning? Well, we can use the learned representations for actually solving some downstream tasks. So here, for example, the downstream task is object detection on Pascal VOC dataset. And so given an image, the network has to find like bounding box around the objects and to identify what is in the bounding box. And so the object detector that we use was FastStar CNN. And now we can evaluate different initialization for this neural network system. We can start from random weights. So here there is no pre-training. We can start from supervised weights. So it's weights which have been pre-trained with like the label classification task. Or we can start with weights which has been learned with self-supervision. And one of the self-supervised framework is Deep Cluster. So let's look at the numbers that we get on object detection with these different pre-trainings. So when we start from random weights, we have this performance. And at the time of the publication, so in 2018, the best published numbers were at this performance. So we could see that there is like really a benefit from starting from self-supervised weights instead of random weights. And yeah, at the time of the publication, we were like state of the art on that task, but we were still like, significantly below the performance that you would get with supervised pre-training. So at this moment, self-supervised pre-training was performing okay, but not as good as supervised pre-training. And I think a good thing about Deep Cluster is that it also produces clusters. So the actual task that you are using to train the network is also like useful for something. So what we could do was to evaluate the clusters that we get. And so here on this plot, on the x-axis, we look at the epochs, so like 1 unit of training. And on the y-axis, we look at the normalized mutual information. So it's like a measure of correlation between the clusters that we get and the ground truth classes in the dataset. And so we see this plot means that as long as, when we train Deep Cluster, the clusters that we get, they are becoming more and more correlated with the real classes of the dataset. And we can also visualize the cluster that we get, and we see that much of them are like visually or semantically consistent. But I think Deep Cluster was like a kind of proof of concept that you can use clustering methods to actually train a network without supervision, but there were like many limitations to that work. So I think the first one is that it's very unstable and inefficient, because as you are doing like a new clustering at each epoch, and there is no like link from the clustering from one epoch to the other, it means that the classification problem is completely changing from one epoch to the other one. So it means like during one epoch, you are training for a certain classification problem, but then at the next epoch, the classification problem is completely changing. And so when you see the training loss, it's really like this. So yeah, I think it was unstable and inefficient. Also, like there is a trivial solution where you can just have only one cluster and then it's trivial to predict. And so in order to avoid that trivial solution, we were doing like some tricks like to, yeah. Also, like, as I said, random cropping is super important in the method, but it's, I mean, we were not really modeling it in the model. So using k-means is a bit cumbersome. And I think most importantly, the method is not online. So it really depends on the notion of epoch. And so you cannot scale it. I mean, so it depends on the size of the dataset, and you cannot like use the method out of the box to train like billion scale or huge data set. Because so you do like a new clustering after one pass on the data, but for example, if your data set is like billion scale, typically you're going to do only one or two passes on the data set. So for the first limitation, we had some, I mean, it was not too difficult to make the method a bit more stable. That's what we proposed in 2020. But then there was like other stuff. I mean, more work was required to overcome that limitation. So yeah, the question that we were trying to answer at the time was, can we replace k-means by an online algorithm? And can we model the importance of random cropping? And so it's in our paper SWAV, which we published at NeurIPS last year, that we tried to overcome that, I mean, to answer that questions. So yeah, let me introduce SWAV. So here, the different crops of the same image must have the same cluster assignment. So it means that in the same batch, we take two crops from an image, and the assignment on crop A is the pseudo label for crop B. And so the cluster assignment is computed on the current batch. So this makes the method working online, and it does not rely on the notion of on the size of the dataset anymore. Also, we include like explicit constraints to prevent the collapse. And finally, we leverage the progress from the self-supervised community. So this progress is like better neural architecture, better data augmentation, and better optimization. So let's detail the model a bit more precisely. So from an image, we take a crop. And as before, we look at the score that we get on like k latent classes or clusters. But now we need to have like a pseudo label for actually train it with the classification loss. And so for this, we take like another crop. And here, with the representation of that crop, we do like a step of cluster assignment with optimal transport, which I'm going to detail afterwards. And this allows to have like a soft pseudo label that we use to train the network. And so here I'm going to detail two, I think, crucial aspects in this framework. So the multi-crop, which is happening here, and the cluster assignment with optimal transport. So let's start with this one. So here what we do is batch cluster assignment with optimal transport. And so our goal is to assign B samples. So it's like the samples, the representation which are in the current batch to K clusters. And so here the clusters are like represented by cluster prototypes, which live in the same space as the representation of the images. So we want to find a mapping between the samples and the cluster prototypes. And so, as I said, we introduced like an explicit constraint that all the prototypes should be selected in the same amount of time. So this prevents like one prototype to dominate during the training. And so if we write this in math, we end up with this problem. And it's actually like an instance of an optimal transport problem. And the solution is, I mean, there is an algorithm to solve this problem, which is sync-on-knob. And the solution is given by this expression. And so this is actually super easy to compute on GPU. It's just like the exponential of the dot product between the cluster prototypes and the representations. And there is two normalizing constants. that we can approximate with like successive normalization. So that's like in practice, it's very easy to implement in like a few lines of code. So yeah, that's it for the cluster assignment part. So let's focus on multi-crop now. So from an image, we're going to take two sets of views. The first set of view is what I call global views. So it's views which are of like large resolution and which cover a large part of the original image. So for example, more than 50% of the area of the image. And then we take another set of views, which are the local views, and which are of smaller resolution and cover only parts of that image. And so now what we do is that the local views should predict the pseudo label given by the local global view. And this is local to global matching. So it means that like the pseudo label, so the target is given by a global representation of the image, and we want to match like so the representation of parts of that image to this global representation. And this gives like very important performance boost. So yeah, let's look at the results that we get with all of this. So here the benchmark that we consider is a linear evaluation on ImageNet. And so I don't know if you're familiar with this benchmark, but what we do is that we pre-train the neural network on a data set without the labels with like the self-supervised loss. And then we freeze the weights of that network, and we only train a linear classifier on top of the frozen weights. And so here are the results when we use only two global views. So there is no multi-crop happening here. And we compare with SimCLR, which was the state of the art at the time of publication, which is basically based on, which is like contrastive learning. And we compare with Deep Cluster V2, which is like the improved version of Deep Cluster, and SWAV. And we see that both Deep Cluster and SWAV outperform SimCLR. And Deep Cluster V2 is slightly better than SWAV, but the thing is, it has, it's not online, and I think SWAV is a better model because, yeah, it's simpler and it does not rely, it does not depend on the size of the data set. So, yeah, in a sense, it's more generic. So that's the performance when we have two global views. And now we can look at the performance with multi-crop. So here we have chosen the views so that these two settings have actually the same computational budget. And so we see that all the methods like that we consider really benefit from this multi-crop strategy. And especially the method based on clustering seem to benefit more from that effect. So overall, we managed to have like a pretty significant boost compared to the state of the art of the time, which was here, and here is our published numbers. So that's for the comparison between like the different self-supervised frameworks. But also like a comparison that we want to do is like self-supervised versus supervised pre-training, just like we did with object detection with Deep Cluster. And so once again, here we're going to evaluate the representation on different downstream tasks. And here we have a much more thorough benchmark of downstream tasks. So we do classification on different data sets, so places, VOC, and iNaturalist. And we also do object detection on VOC and on COCO. And for COCO, we use two object detectors, so MaskRCNN and DETER. And here in gray, it's the performance of supervised pre-training. And we see that now when we apply the self-supervised pre-training, so with SWAV, we outperform this supervised pre-training on all the considered downstream tasks. So at the time, that was like, for me, it was an exciting result because when I started working on self-supervised learning, and for example, with Deep Cluster, we did not reach that performance. And I didn't even know that it was possible to have better features with self-supervised learning than with supervised learning. So yeah, that concludes that part. And so I think now we can talk about Dino, the paper that we've released, I think, 1 month ago now, which is about like training self-supervised models with vision transformers. So first of all, let's review Dino, which is like a method for self-supervised learning. And I think it's, I mean, honestly, we were hesitating between calling it Dino or SWAV v2 because it's really like, I think it's a natural extension that we made from SWAV. So I like to present it that way, but you could also like see it in many other ways. So yeah, that's the presentation of SWAV that I showed you before. And this, and from there, what I did was simply to, instead of using exactly the same network for like the branch which gives the cluster assignment, what we did, like inspired from other works like Moko or Bayol, we use like an exponential moving average of the main network to give the pseudo labels. And actually we observed that by doing so, we had like, a significant boost of performance. So that was pretty cool. But not only we had this boost of performance, we also observed that it made the training much more stable. And by doing so, you could like completely remove the part with like the Sinkhorn algorithm, and you could use directly the output of this network as pseudo labels for soft pseudo labels for the classification loss. So yeah, and we call Dino for self-distillation with no labels, because actually if you look like this model straight in the eyes, you see that it's actually like just what is done in self-distillation, where like the K output or like the K classes, but here we don't have K classes, so like K is just a hyperparameter. And so yeah, this network is like the student, and this one is the teacher, which is like obtained with an exponential moving average of the main network. And the student is trained to match the output of the teacher, like on another view of the same image. So that's for like the self-supervised model Dino. And yes, also I forgot to mention. So if you do this, it's going just like with deep cluster or SWAV, it's going, if you don't have constraints or any tricks, it's going to collapse to one unique dimension here, or clusters. And so we found that there was like a very simple way to prevent that solution, which I'm going to explain. So yes, if we don't do anything, there is this collapse to one unique dimension. And so here what we do is simply centering. So the center is like the average score of like across the different images in the batch. And we remove that average score. And so it does not look like this because it's probability distribution. So it's more like this. And so now we see that if we simply do this centering operation, then you have another form of collapse that appears, which is the collapse to uniform assignment. And so we want to make this uniform assignment non-stationary. And for this, we want simply to enhance the small differences that there is between the different class scores. And this, it can be simply done with sharpening. So in practice, it's like using a low temperature in the softmax operation. And so intuitively, it's like we force the teacher to actually like make a decision and to choose like one dominant, one assignment. Even though it's still a soft assignment, it's like the temperature is not set to 0. So if you set it to 0, it's like hard assignment. So yeah, in a nutshell, we have like a very simple strategy, which is centering plus sharpening to prevent the collapse of the representations. So that's the results of Dino compared to SWAV when we use CompNet. So it's like more or less performing the same, but it's a bit simpler. So here we consider two benchmarks, so which is important. So the first one is linear evaluation, as I described before, so frozen weights and linear classifier learned. And the second one, which I think is pretty interesting, is KNN classification. So here, actually, it's like zero-shot learning because you are not doing any gradient update or you are not learning any parameters, basically. it's really like you do one pass on the data set with your neural network to get the representation for the whole data set, and you simply do a KNN classification on that features. So it's actually like super cheap to deploy. So yeah, so now let's see what happens when we compare like ConvNets and Vision Transformer for this self-supervised method. So ConvNets have been the status quo architecture for images, and recently, I think you're aware of it, Vision Transformers have emerged as an alternative to ConvNets. And so I'm not going to go into much detail about the Vision Transformer architecture, but very briefly, it's like you take an image and you take non-overlapping. I mean, you divide that image into non-overlapping patches. So that gives you like a sequence of patches which you embed. And then you add an extra learnable tokens to that sequence. So you have this sequence of tokens that you can feed into a like standard transformer encoder, which uses like multi-head self-attention. And then in output of the transformer, you have like a sequence of output tokens. And here we discard the tokens from the patches, and we only keep the token, the output class token, whose role is to aggregate the information from the entire sequence. So yeah, let's look at the results when we apply Dino to Vision Transformer. So here are again the performance of Dino trained on ConvNet, so ResNet 50 with linear and KNN evaluation. And now it's the performance when we apply Dino to Vision Transformer. So we use a small Vision Transformer, which is like comparable in terms of number of parameters and throughput to ResNet 50. And we see that on both linear and KNN benchmarks, like using the Vision Transformer is really like performing better than the ResNet 50 network trained with Dino. And very interestingly, the performance is like the performance boost is like pretty important for the KNN classification. So it means that Dino plus Vision Transformer, it's a good recipe for excellent KNN performance. And when we compare like with different Vision Transformer networks, so with different level of throughput. So if you go on the left of that plot, like the throughput is low, so it means that the network is quite heavy to train. And yeah, and we see that we are having better performance than the previous work when evaluated with zero-shot learning. So I think there are many potential applications to having a system that is very good for KNN classification, and one of them is like copy detection, which also is a problem which is important for Facebook. And here the task is like given a query, you need to find like copies of that query into a database. So it's important, for example, if you have like a terrorism propaganda and you want to find like duplicates of that propaganda into like a system. So yeah, so and it actually turns out that Dino is very good at this task, even though it was not targeted for. It was not designed with this task in particular in mind, and it's performing better than like the same architecture trained with supervision, or like multigrain, which is an architecture like dedicated, which was designed for copy detection basically. So yeah, that was quite exciting to have these results. And when we train like self-supervised learning with Vision Transformer, we also observe like an interesting property that we see we can actually look at the self-attention that we get with this Vision Transformer trained with self-supervision. And here we look at the self-attention of the class token of the last block. So it's basically saying like, where does the class token is looking at in the image. And so we see that actually like the network is really focusing on what is salient in the image, and it's what we consider as objects. And we can apply a threshold on that attention map, and that gives like a segmentation map. And this comes like completely for free because the network has never seen any labels, nor has it been trained with like a segmentation targeted objective. So yeah, that was quite exciting to see this result. And it actually holds for like pretty much all the images we tested it with. And so here are like other examples that we get. And that's like a qualitative, I mean, that's a visualization. But we also want to have like a number to assess what we see. And for this, we use like the Jacquard similarity, so intersection over union between the ground truth mask that there is in a dataset and the self-attention mask that we generate by simply thresholding the self-attention. We've seen like we have this number, and when we use the same architecture with supervision, this number is much lower, and we see that the self-attention maps are not like segmented as they are with self-supervision. And actually, it's not a property of Dino. I think it's a property of like different. I mean, we also observed that with the different self-supervised frameworks which we experimented with. And so I think an interpretation of this is that the task of supervised training is actually simpler than self-supervised learning, and the network does not need to have like a full understanding of the structure of what is in the image in order to be good at supervised learning. It means like, for example, if you have an image of a dog, then in self-supervised training, what you're going to do is like taking two, I mean, even in those frameworks, which are like declination of the same principle, is that you take two crops in that image of the dog. So for example, one crop is going to end up on the head of the dog, like another one is going to end up on the tail. So you have these two parts, and then you need to predict like head from tail and tail from head. So I think to be good at this task, you must like somehow model the structure of the dog, and you need to focus on all that structure. Whereas in supervised training, what you have to do is predict like label dog from the head and label dog from the tail, and you don't have like this explicit modeling between those two parts. I mean, that's very hand wavy, but that's my intuition about why we are seeing this like salient, I mean, this saliency self-attention heat maps. And we can also like apply this, I mean, we can visualize the self-attention on the different frames of a video. And we see that it's pretty exciting to see how the network is able to focusing on the dog. And another property that we see is that actually, so in the previous visualization, we are only looking at one head, but the network, the vision transformer has different heads, different self-attention heads. And we see what we observe is like typically different heads would focus on different parts of an image. So for example, here, like one head in blue is focusing on the structure of the tower, like another one is focusing on the clock, and then another one is focusing on the flag. And we also observed that some heads were like kind of specialized. So for example, whenever there was like images of animals, so I think the duck here are good examples. So for example, for the duck images, you would have like one head which is focusing on the heads of the ducks, another one on the abdomen, and another one on the legs. And the same head would focus like consistently on the legs of the animals you have in the images. I mean, there are much more visualization in the paper, so I encourage you to check it out if you're interested. And yeah, we can do like some application of this to video object segmentation. So we consider the Davis 2017 dataset. So on video object segmentation, so it's a tracking task. So you're given a video, and you're given the segmentation mask for the first frame, and then you need to propagate that mask to the other frames of the video. And so the best self-supervised approach is performing at this performance. So the best supervised approach is actually like it's performing much better. It actually does not fit in that plot. But yeah, we focus on self-supervised approaches for this. And we see that when we apply Dino with like the default setting, so 16 by 16 resolution patches, we are much below the best self-supervised approaches, which are actually targeting like dense and tracking downstream tasks. And so here the idea is that we want to make the network like learn more dense representation. And for this, like a straightforward way to do this is simply to use smaller patches. And so we see that when we train the network with 8 by 8 patches instead of 16 by 16, then we have like a tremendous like boost of performance on this dense task. And it's actually performing better than the best self-supervised approach on this. So yeah, that concludes the presentation of my different contributions. So maybe we can go through a few limitations of, in my view, of self-supervised learning. So yeah, and I think this like open questions which, in my opinion, remain unanswered in the self-supervised community. Like for example, the methods and the models, they are very inefficient and they are slow learners. So typically you need much more compute than you need for supervised learning. And it's actually like, there is you could argue that, okay, you need to have more compute to train the self-supervised learning, but they are being more effective on the downstream task. But I think like the gap is still a bit, the gap is here, but it's not like a huge gap. And I think it's not big enough to justify the fact that you need like 10 times more compute to train this model. And so, yeah, I think we would need to, at the same time, improve again, even more the performance of the self-supervised model, and also to make this more efficient. Also, like another limitation, in my opinion, is that there is no very convincing self-supervised recognition system. And whenever you want to do detection or segmentation, you need like a lot of labels and a lot of adaptation for this task. And I think the results that we show with the segmentation, self-attention, which are segmented, that could be a direction for future work that could be a way to exploit that for doing like self-supervised recognition. Another limitation, I think, is that we are seeing, in my opinion, like the performance on the different benchmarks, it's actually saturating. And also, like we have been like evaluating the effect of scaling these models on more data and with bigger models. And I think the effect of doing that is a bit disappointing. And my take on this is that like the different self-supervised learning methods which are proposed like very like frequently, which are coming out on the arXiv very frequently, they are kind of all doing the same thing. It's like fitting the data augmentation, learning invariance to random cropping with different strategies to avoid collapse. So you can call it contrastive learning, or you can call it like clustering, as I did during my PhD, or you can also call it feature whitening. But all of this is like, yeah, just different ways of preventing that collapse. And what is driving the performance, in my opinion, is like invariance to random cropping. And so as all these models are like doing pretty much the same thing, they are all having like pretty much the same performance. And maybe we are actually like in a very, in a minimum locale of self-supervised learning, and someone would need to completely think out of the box to find something new that would actually like gives a better performance, or maybe not. Or maybe another direction is what we try to do in Dino is like to seek progress in an orthogonal direction by like changing the architecture and see what happens here if we use Vision Transformer instead of ConvNet. Yeah, and another limitation, I think, is like we are actually shifting from the design of like different pretext tasks from colorization, jigsaw puzzle, to actually a design of data augmentation pipeline and what invariant we want to inject into the data augmentation. So you can say that the data augmentation pipeline is completely handcrafted and not unsupervised. And so, yeah, so I think that's something that, I mean, there is a work around that, so we could find ways to find this data augmentation automatically, or also like to exploit other modalities such as video as a way of mining this invariant that we want to have in the data. And another limitation is like the model selection, because actually I think this self-supervised works, they are very overfit to the downstream task that they consider. And in self-supervised learning, I mean, it's not like in supervised training where the loss is kind of, I mean, it's still a surrogate, but it's kind of reflecting what you want to have at the end. Like, for example, like in the classification case, you have this 0-1 loss that you are truly interested in, and you have this negative low likelihood that you minimize to, which is like a surrogate for this. But it's still a good, I mean, it's still a good proxy to evaluate the performance of the model. But my point is that in self-supervised learning, what you truly want to have is good performance on downstream tasks. And this, I mean, it's not trivial to evaluate. So what you do is that you transfer your network like regularly to that downstream task. And what you end up doing most of the time is like overfitting and choosing your hyperparameters and your models based on that downstream task that you want to optimize for. And this way you are not really creating like generic features. And I think, yeah, that could be, I mean, I don't have an answer to this. I don't know how to do it. But yeah, I think we would need to have a more principled way to select the models. And yeah, we are fitting the validation task, and therefore we're not having like generic features. So yeah, that's it for me. I hope I was not too long. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
Yes, so I have a question. Thank you. I have a question. So what is the new input to the vision transformer when you have also Dino in the play, basically combining with image patches? How does the new input look like to the transformer?
I'm not sure to understand the question. What do you mean by new input?
So previously, the vision transformer had the image patches as the input.
Yeah, but that's still the case with self-supervised learning.
So how does it, where is Dino applied in with vision transformer?
Okay, so maybe you can go back to the vision transformer. So Dino is it's like a loss. So like all this part is pretty much, it's exactly the same actually. Just like instead of doing like label classification, here you are doing like the Dino loss, which is this. So here in this, you can simply replace this neural network by the vision transformer. Okay. Does that make
sense? I see. Yeah, it makes sense now. Okay, great. Thank you.
You can really think of it as a loss. I mean, it's not just a loss because you also need to have like this different props. But I mean, this part, I mean, this is where you plug in the vision transformer.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other questions?
So how about, sorry, continue.
Sorry, so is it also applied in the teacher part? Or?
Yes. So here the student and the teacher networks, they are having exactly the same architecture. So it's like the same vision transformer architecture, but the weights are different because this one is like a slow version of the weights of this one. So this one is like, it's a rolling average of the previous version of the student.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Sure.
And there was another question.
Yeah, so a couple quick questions. I'm sorry, they're not going to be very interesting because they're about hyperparameters, but I really appreciate the answer. So regarding this exponential moving average, I assume that you do something like, so every few epochs, or maybe every epoch, you like move the, move maybe like 1%, 5%, the parameters of the teacher towards the parameters of the student.
No, actually, you do it at each iteration.
Okay.
Yes.
And so did you find the choice of how much do you move them towards the student's parameters to be very significant, or it was somewhat robust to that hyperparameter?
I would say it's quite robust, but and okay, so it's quite robust, but if you want to have like a state-of-the-art results and you want to really push the numbers and hopefully have a paper accepted, you need to find the right spot to have like, so there is definitely an optimum to this parameter, but I would say it's quite robust. And the thing is, if the network is not slow enough, so if it's like updating too quickly, then it becomes unstable, but there are ways to make it stable. It's actually like using again the optimal transport that we were using with SWAV. So you see, actually in SWAV, you don't have this moving average. So it's exactly the same network. So it's like you're doing a moving average, but with a like momentum parameter of 0. And for this not to collapse, you need to have this component. But so yeah, so actually, if the parameter is not set correctly, it will be unstable. But then there is a way to make it stable, is to use this this component. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just impressed that you found 2 different ways of solving the same problem and that they both worked. Like, congratulations.
Thanks.
And so I have another quick question, if the other members don't mind. If you could go to the right, to where you have different heads, like different attentions.
Yes.
So I was super impressed by that. That looks super cool. And then it just popped in my mind, how is this like an effect that you found only when you hit the exact number of attention heads, or do you find, if you have looked at it, that the number of attention heads doesn't really matter, in the sense that you end up having these meaningful representations? I can rephrase that if it doesn't make sense.
Yes, I think you're like wondering what is the effect of the number of heads of that on this.
Yes, essentially.
So yeah, that's a good question. So I didn't do like a very thorough ablation of this, but I think like we actually train with 2 different architecture, one which is like small and one which we call base. And in the base architecture, you have more heads. I think you have 12 heads, whereas in this case you have 6 heads. And between the two, we could also see that that like the different heads would focus on different parts. But that's like, for example, here we are like looking only at 3 heads, but I mean there are 3 other heads that I did not cherry pick for that visualization. But there are like, if I remember from this one, like some are like redundant with some that they are here, and also there was a head which was always focusing on the background. So yeah, I don't know if it answered your question, but
no, it does. It does.
I think this is not. I mean, I think you would have the same effect if you were using like 5 heads or 10 heads. But maybe if you have more heads, you will have more redundancy. Redundancy. I'm not sure I'm saying it right.
Redundancy.
Redundancy.
Understood. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. That was a super clear explanation.
Okay.
So with what's the relationship between number of heads? Like if you have an image with a large number of objects, would it that exceeds the number of heads? Would that be a problem?
But the thing is, this network is, I think it's not very good at instance segmentation. And for example, I think the duck image is cool. Like here you see there are 3 or 4 ducks, but it's actually like you don't have one head which is focusing on one instance of the duck, another one which is focusing on one instance of the duck. It's like for the network, all of this is like the same stuff. So what I mean, I think if you have several objects and these objects, I mean, if it's different object, yeah, maybe you will need to have like several heads, but if like the objects are the same, then the network would like say, okay, all of this, it's like the same thing, and it will not like differentiate between the different instances. But again, like this, I mean, when we designed Dino, we didn't targeted this. It's really a byproduct of our design. So yeah, we didn't even think about like the effect that the number of heads would have on like differentiating between different objects, because what we were trying to do is simply to have good self-supervised representations and not and we were not like designing an object detector or instance segmentation model.
Thank you.
I've got a kind of follow-up question to this. So the attention maps, all like you say, they don't segment instances, and they also seem very kind of object focused.
Yes.
So if your downstream task was something much more holistic, like you wanted to classify the style of the whole image or something, well, first of all, the first question is, would it still be good pre-training for a task like that? But the second is, where do you think this like object bias comes from? Is it in your loss and the kind of the clusters, or is it maybe in the cropping strategy? Does that somehow encourage focusing on objects?
So for the style, for downstream task on style, I mean, I don't know, we would need to test, but I think that's related to what I was saying at the end of the talk, that like the model that we design, and especially the data augmentation that we choose to use, they are really like, I mean, they have been chosen with like ImageNet classification in mind. And so that's definitely overfit on this kind of downstream. And so it's possibly that if the downstream that you target is like on style differentiation, you will need to completely change the hyperparameters and especially data augmentation that you use for your model. That would be my guess. And then for the object bias, I think that comes from like the data set, like how the data sets are built, and how as human we put like what is salient in the image, and we're not taking like an image of just where there is nothing salient in that image. So it's actually like if you would train it on a completely different data set, that's possibly that I mean that it's really like obvious what I'm saying, but here you are actually learning what is in the data set, and that's where this bias comes from in my mind. And also as I said, like for this we are visualizing only one head. And actually, so I cherry-picked the head so that it's like on the entire object. But for example, here you would have like another head that would focus only on this thing. I don't know how to say it in English. Another one that would focus like only on the background, so on the forest. And so so the network is focusing on like these different parts and not only on the object.
That's really interesting. So I hadn't thought before, by training on images from cameras, you're basically biasing towards the things that humans point cameras at,
Yes.
which tend to be objects. And that may not be the same as what babies see in their visual field or something.
Yes. Definitely.
Okay,
Hi,
maybe
but-
time for one more question.
Yeah, could I ask one? I was just wondering about your labels, your pseudo labels,
Yes.
where you're kind of doing some early in your talk, you talked about k-means and what have you. And I was thinking that when you know, a latent vector falls near the center of a cluster, you're more confident in the label, and when it's between clusters, you're less confident. And I wondered if you had anything in your system that handles the confidence in those labels.
So no, it was, I mean, we didn't do any of these refinements. It's like, yeah, the simplest clustering algorithm that you can think of, like k-means, and we simply like use these assignments as pseudo labels. And actually in our paper, we try like another more, another probably better clustering method, power iterative clustering, and it was giving more or less the same performance. And I think my take on that is that in deep cluster, that we were not realizing when we were doing it, is that what is really important in deep cluster is not really like the clustering, it's more like how you use the clustering to make like two crops, so two augmentation of the same image having the same representation. And so that's why, like, I think if you change the clustering, or if you have something more, something better on the clustering part of the algorithm, this is not necessarily going, that's my opinion, this is not going to reflect, like, to induce a better downstream performance. But on the other hand, if you change the data augmentation, it's going to have like drastic effects on the performance. And that's why, like, from deep cluster, then we try to like remove, and even in Dino, like completely prune the importance of clustering, and to enhance the importance of this matching between two crops, between two views of an image.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. All right. We're past our allotted slot, so I think we should, at this point, thank our speaker. Here's some virtual applause. Same room.